So these texts are called Upanishad or Vedanta, the culmination of Vedanta, the end of Vedanta. Sometimes they're literally at the end of certain Vedic Samhitas, sometimes they're in the middle, but they set forth the highest wisdom of the Vedas. So they are called Vedanta, the end, the culmination, the highest knowledge, Vedanta. Veda literally means knowledge. Here it means spiritual knowledge. There are many Upanishads. There are many Upanishads. But among them, 10 Upanishads are of particular interest and importance. And these 10 are important because some 1300 years ago, Adi Shankaracharya selected them for commenting, for writing commentaries, extensive explanations. So these are the central Upanishads upon which Advaita Vedanta is based. Isha Upanishad, Kena Upanishad, Katha Upanishad, Prashna Upanishad, Aitairya Upanishad, Taittiriya Upanishad, Mundaka Upanishad, Mandukya Upanishad, Chandogya Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. The 10, we call them major Upanishads because Shankaracharya commented upon them. Some of them are very small. Isha Upanishad, Mandukya Upanishad is the smallest. Some are very big. Brihadaranyaka, Chandogya, these are very big Upanishads. Some of them are in verse, mantras in verse. Some of them are in prose. They are very old. Even by modern reckoning, they are maybe 30 centuries old, 3,000 years, 4,000 years old. By tradition, they are ageless because they were revealed by God to the Upanishadic seers. They are records of spiritual experiences, timeless spiritual experiences coming through the sages of the Upanishads, the rishis. They have been set forth in poetic language there. And the essence of the Upanishads was taken by Sri Krishna and set forth in the book which is the most well-known book of the Hindus, the Bhagavad Gita. So the Bhagavad Gita, the song of God, God here means Krishna, the song of God, Bhagavad Gita, is the essence of the Upanishads. There's a verse which says that the Upanishads are the cows, and the one who milked these cows was Krishna, and we got the milk, the nectar-like milk is the Bhagavad Gita. So the essence of the Upanishads we find in the Bhagavad Gita. It's a practical approach to the Upanishads. What do we do? What is the knowledge of the self? How do we meditate? How do we analyze our life? Bhakti, jnana, dhyana, karma, all these things you find in Bhagavad Gita. But the Bhagavad Gita is firmly rooted in the Upanishads. So that's also Vedanta. There's another text, not discussed so much, called the Brahma Sutras. Not discussed with very good reason. Because if you think this is dry and philosophical, you should try the Brahma Sutras. I remember when I became a monk, a novice, so the first thing I did was I visited the library looking for books and Vedanta books, and I took the biggest, shiniest book I could find. That was the Brahma Sutras, English translation by Swami Gambhiranandaji. Brahma Sutras, Sanskrit commentaries, translation by Swami Gambhiranandaji. One of the most dense books in human civilization. I pulled it out and I told Swami that I've got a book on Vedanta which I plan to start. And he asked, oh, what book is that? I said, it's something called Brahma Sutras, commentary of Shankaracharya translated by Swami Gambhirananda. And so the Swami said, oh, that book, you won't go beyond a single page, beyond the first page. And that scared me so much that I put it back in the library immediately. It's only after I came to the training center and I started, it was taught to us, then I started reading it. So there are 555 aphorisms, sutras. Sutras are compact sayings. And these aphorisms, a lot of meaning is packed into each sutra. And there are 555 of these. What are these? These are basically reasoning, philosophical reflection upon the Upanishads. Upanishads are poetry. They are mystical. Now, if you want to understand them, if you have got questions about it, you talk about Brahman, existence, consciousness, bliss. Where is this blessed Brahman? You say the world is false. How is the world false? And what do you mean the world is false? In what sense is it false? I am not the body and the mind, I am spirit. What is spirit? How am I not the body and the mind? The aim of life is God realization. What do you mean by God realization? Can you precisely tell us? All these things are discussed threadbare. I can see a lot of interested looks, but I warn you. First, let's finish this before we go into the Brahma Sutras. Now, Shankaracharya, he wrote commentaries on the Upanishads, on the Bhagavad Gita, and on the Brahma Sutra. And these Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita and Brahma Sutra, taken together with the commentaries, are called Prasthanatraya, the threefold canon of Vedanta. The threefold canon, the canonical texts of Vedanta, central texts of Vedanta, the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutras. Especially when we consider Vedanta as a philosophical system, the Brahma Sutras are important. So Brahma Sutras with Shankaracharya's commentary forms the basis of the philosophical system known as Advaita Vedanta, the non-dual interpretation of Vedanta. There are other types of Vedanta, different flavors of Vedanta, if you will. Different flavors. You go to a shop, ice cream shop, you have a lot of different flavors of ice cream. So there are different flavors, different types of Vedanta, depending on the interpretation, especially on the interpretation of the Brahma Sutras. So Shankaracharya's commentary, Brahma Sutra Bhashya, is the basis of the philosophy of non-dual Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. There were others. Ramanujacharya, the great qualified non-dualist, he wrote the Sri Bhashya commentary on the Brahma Sutras. And that forms the philosophical basis of the system known as Vishishtadvaita Vedanta. Madhvacharya wrote the Purna Prajna Bhashya on the same Brahma Sutras, which forms the basis, the philosophical basis of the great system known as Dvaita Vedanta. Nimbarkacharya, he wrote a Bhashya called the Vedanta Parijata Bhashya on the Brahma Sutras, which forms the basis of the system known as Dvaitadvaita Vedanta. Vallabhacharya wrote the Anubhashya on the Brahma Sutras, which forms the basis of another system of Vedanta called Shuddhadvaita Vedanta. And there are others too. There is the Govinda Bhashya on the Brahma Sutras, which forms the basis of Achintya Bheda Bheda, the philosophical system of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. If that doesn't draw any sign of recognition, I just, the ISKCON, the Hare Krishnas, so they are rooted in their tradition is rooted in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, which is a stream of Vedanta, which has Achintya Bheda Vedanta at its core. So these are varieties of Vedanta. And what we are studying, what we teach primarily is Advaita Vedanta, the non-dual Vedanta in the lineage of Shankaracharya. Now, if all this sounds formidable, it is formidable. Let me not make it, no Vedanta light here. It is formidable. So for that reason, the great masters of Vedanta, they wrote introductory texts. They wrote texts which makes our entry into this formidable citadel much easier. And these introductory texts are called Prakarana Granthas. Prakarana Granthas, introductory texts. Many of you are holding in your hands, this book is a Prakarana Grantha, an introductory text. There are many such introductory texts. Among them, a very famous text is Vedanta Sara. Another text is Vedanta Paribhasha. Another well-known introductory text, Prakarana Grantha, is Viveka Chudamani. And there are others. Shankaracharya himself wrote a few. Aparoksha Anubhuti, Upadesha Sahasri, Atma Bodha. These are all Prakarana Granthas. They are all introductory texts. They introduce you to certain areas of Vedanta. They either give you a bird's eye view, or certain important areas of Vedanta, they are introduced for the benefit of the beginner. So this is what we are studying. A few more comments, then I shall stop and take questions. There is something we should know before we go into Vedanta. This is called the Sadhana Chatushtaya. There are some preliminary qualities that the masters of Vedanta expect from us. Now don't be scared. We all have it to some degree or the other, but we need to work on it. What are these qualities? They are 4 in number. 4 qualities which we need to keep our eyes on. One is Viveka. Second, Vairagya. Third, Shama Dhamadi Shat Sampati, a set of 6 disciplines. And fourth, Mumukshutvam, a desire for freedom and a yearning for liberation, a yearning for God realization. I'll repeat that. Viveka, it means analysis or discrimination between the real and the unreal. Viveka, from where Swami Vivekananda gets his name. Vivekananda. This is Vivek. Viveka means to distinguish 2 things which are mixed up. Vivich Prithak Karani. To separate, to understand 2 things which are mixed up, which come together mixed, to separate them at least in your mind, to know that this is good and this is bad for me. This is eternal and this is temporary. This is real and this is false, though they come mixed together. The ability to do that is called Viveka. And certain amount of that is required to begin Vedanta. She should have told me, wouldn't have come all this way. I don't have too much of this very esoteric sounding quality. It's nothing more than the feeling that there is something to spiritual life. It's nothing more than the feeling that there is something to spiritual life. There is some truth in spirituality, in religion. There is some eternal truth, which if I can realize, if I can get at it, will be of enormous benefit to me. There is some transcendent truth. A certain faith, a certain feeling, a certain intuition, certain openness to which we all have it. Otherwise, none of us would be here today. So we have that. That is Viveka. The ability to distinguish between the temporal world and some belief in a transcendent truth. And even if that scares you, I particularly like Ramana Maharshi of Arunachala fame. Somebody asked him, am I qualified for Vedanta? It seems so tough. And Ramana Maharshi said, did you say I? Am I qualified? Did you say I? If you use the term I, you are qualified. You say I, that means you have a self. You are the self. So you are fully qualified for Vedanta. Who else is more qualified? So that is Viveka. The second thing is Vairagya. Once I have faith in this, then I want that transcendent truth. I want to realize God. I want to know my own nature. And I am not interested in the pursuits of the world. I may continue to do it for my sustenance, but my primary purpose in life is no longer seeking pleasure and power and pursuing the trivialities of the world. That can no longer be the primary purpose of my life. The two, God and mammon, do not go together. You cannot seek both, you cannot have both together. So, now a committed pursuit of the transcendent truth, if they promise us that I am the spirit, now I want to know that, I want to realize that. That becomes the primary purpose of my life. The rest of life can continue, and indeed it must continue in a spirit of sadhana. When Sri Krishna tells Arjuna in the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita about the Atman, this is what we are studying now. He tells Arjuna about this. Arjuna didn't want to fight the war, didn't want to do his duty. When he's told about this, Arjuna says, exactly, this is what I want. I don't want to fight this war. Then Krishna tells him, now that which you were doing for worldly reasons, you wanted to fight the war for revenge against your villainous cousins. You wanted to fight the war to get a kingdom. Now you say you don't want all that. Very good. But now you must do your duty in the spirit of karma yoga, so that you are fit for realizing this spiritual self which we are talking about. So the life goes on, but our attitude towards it changes. Now we are not pursuing temporal goals, worldly goals anymore. We are pursuing the highest goal, moksha. And the third thing is a set of 6 disciplines. The set of 6 disciplines are very quickly shama, a certain calmness and quietude and control of the mind, certain amount. I'm not trying to scare anybody. Then damaha, certain calmness of the sense organs and motor organs. You can't be too restless. There are people who are very intelligent, but very restless. I met this young boy a few weeks ago, very intelligent. And he was talking to me, but all the time bouncing back and forth. In his late teens, bouncing back. He can't stop it. Now, this is one way. I remember when we were novices and we used to go for scripture classes. And there was one of the novices, one of the brahmacharis sitting with us. He had the habit of, like many of us, we do, habit of shaking his leg while he was sitting, you know. He was sort of swinging his leg while he was sitting and reading a book. And the Swami who was teaching us, suddenly, very sharply, scolded him. What's that? Stop. Sit still. The physical stillness. Not trying to, go out to the world all the time. I remember once we were walking with a senior Swami. It was at night. And there was a creeper hanging nearby with beautiful flowers. And as the Swami walked past it, and we novices were there around him, one of the novices just casually, unthinkingly, took the flower and smelt it. Didn't even pluck it, just smelt it on the creeper and as he was walking by. And the Swami noticed it. He looked back and sharply scolded. In Bengali he said, Eki, ye to bhogi lokha. What is this? This is the sign of a person who wants to have sense enjoyments. It's an unthinking reaction. Something is nice there, I must see it. Something is tasty there, I must eat it. This continuous going out into the world, there must some control over that. And most of us do. We have certain control over that. So that is damaha. And then you have uparati. Turning the mind backwards. That mind which is restrained, it should not flow back into the world, uparati. Rati means enjoyment of the world. Reverse that, uparati. Then we have titiksha, fortitude. A certain spiritual toughness. Toughness is required for success in any endeavor. I have a tummy ache, I'm too tired, I won't meditate today. No, toughness requires I must get up and meditate. It's raining, I won't go to the Vedanta class. No, titiksha, toughness, spiritual toughness requires I must hold on to that, I must go to the Vedanta class. Putting up with the troubles that life throws at us, ignoring all that, holding on to our spiritual pursuit. That is spiritual toughness, and a bit of that is required. And then you have samadhana, meditativeness, settling down, having withdrawn from the world, settling down on God, on the Atman, on Vedanta, thinking about Vedanta, studying Vedanta, practicing Vedanta, and not doing anything else. Reducing our worldly activities, engagements, so that energy and time are poured into this and not to anything else. That's the whole purpose why people become monks. The whole purpose of becoming a monk in the Vedantic tradition is samadhana, so that we can withdraw from the world and settle down on Vedanta. That's the whole purpose. Then Shraddha, a certain faith that what the scriptures say is true. This is not belief, not faith in the sense that you have to believe. It's just the faith that when I go to a class in UCLA or somewhere, a physics class, just that much faith that what the books say is likely to be true, what the professors are teaching me are true. They are not pulling a clever one over me, and it's likely to be true. And I expect to understand and expect to see proof of truth. That much faith is necessary. That's all. When we go to learn anything, that much faith is there. So Shraddha. These are the 6 disciplines. So these are the preliminary qualities which are expected. You see, it's a tall order. If you look at our lives, we have all of that to some extent. What Vedanta tells us is we must cultivate, polish that up, so that we can come up to the required level, the entry level for Vedanta. I'll stop here. This was a preliminary talk on Vedanta, introduction to Vedanta. In the next class, again, we will carry on with the text. Questions? Yes, there's a question there.
Swami, there is no such thing as unconsciousness?
Yes. We will read that a little later. Basically, what we call consciousness and unconsciousness are functions of the mind. There is a state when the mind is active. There is a state when the mind is dull, in torpor. There is a state when the mind shuts down in deep sleep. That's what we call unconscious. But what Vedanta calls consciousness, and what we call consciousness, is the mind plus consciousness. You see, when I am seeing, I'm hearing, I'm talking, science or psychology would call these conscious events. Vedanta says these are, the event part of it is a part of the mind. The consciousness is not an event, it's a constant illumination, constant light. So, what happens is the mind can shut down, consciousness still remains. So that consciousness, the pure consciousness, there's no unconsciousness there. There is no absence of consciousness there. In fact, if you understand this, you can see how people make a mistake. There is an increased interest in pure consciousness among psychologists too. And I saw a workshop, a seminar on pure consciousness, where they were cognitive scientists, psychologists, linguists, computer scientists, all of them. One of the areas they talked about was pure consciousness, and there were papers on that. And one of the papers was called, wait for it, the name of the paper was Pure Consciousness Events. You're good Vedanta students, that's why you laugh. You understand now why the term itself shows a lack of understanding. You're laughing, you understand. You understand that pure consciousness cannot be an event or a series of events. The event part of it is in the mind, in the sense organs, in the mind. These are changes. And pure consciousness is a constant, unchanging illumination, which cannot be called a event or events. Events happen in pure consciousness. They're illumined by pure consciousness. Pure consciousness itself is not an event. Okay. Yes, there's a question. Devin.
Can you just reiterate what you, in the fourth verse that we read, it says that consciousness illuminates the various thoughts in the mind and how it's different from introspection?
Yes, that's an important point. The fourth verse says the consciousness by itself illumines the various thoughts, feelings, emotions in the mind. Desire, kama, sankalpa, thoughts, sandeha, doubt, shraddha, faith, ashraddha, lack of faith, dhriti, fortitude, holding on to something, itara, etc., ri, modesty, dhi, understanding, bhi, fear, iti eva madin, and all such things are illumined by consciousness itself. I can put it this way, it's very subtle, but there's a point here. You see, the doubt which may be raised here, and it should be raised, is that why are you saying that consciousness illumines all these? Why can't you say the mind is thinking about the mind? When I say that consciousness illumines a thought in my mind, isn't it the mind thinking about that thought? Because the mind can do that. That's the thing. The mind is designed to think about things. So the things which the mind can think about are in the world outside. They are in the body. I can think about my body also. And I can think about my thoughts. I am having spiritual thoughts. I am having non-spiritual thoughts. I am having good thoughts and bad thoughts. I'm trying to remember something. I cannot remember something. This is the mind thinking about itself. This is called introspection. What is mentioned here is not introspection. The simple test of this is, even when I'm not introspecting, suppose I'm fully engaged in some activity, I'm still aware. I'm not thinking about thinking, but I'm still thinking and aware. In fact, that's a much more concentrated state of the mind. And the second proof which the Vedantins gave, why it is different from introspection, is that there is consciousness in deep sleep too. Where the mind is just not thinking, the mind has shut down, there is consciousness. But that many people may not be convinced of, many people may find it difficult to understand. But just take consciousness as we experience in our day-to-day activities, just now. I can think about what's going on in my mind, or I may not think about what's going on in my mind. Even when I'm not thinking about it, still I experience joy, sadness, satisfaction, lack of satisfaction, understanding, incomprehension. I experience these, which means they are all objects of consciousness. There's one point I'll mention here and later on. The great temptation by reading all this is to try to be a witness. There are meditation techniques where they tell you, now witness your thoughts, witness your sensations, witness your thoughts. And there are good meditation techniques. But Vedanta is not talking about that. The witness that Vedanta talks about is the witness whether you try or you do not try. Whether you ever read Vedanta or you do not read Vedanta, the witness is always the witness. It's not a created witness. It's not a witness we manufacture by effort. What they're pointing out is an existing truth. I remember a Swami in Uttarakhand explaining this, what we are reading. So he's explaining this. After having explained this, at the end of the class, he says, in Hindi, he says, what he said was, well, Swamis, we are all around with Swamis. So, Swamis, do you feel that you are the Sakshi, the witness? Do you feel that? And now you do feel it, don't you, that you are the witness? And many of them nodded, yes. And what he said works very well in Hindi. He said, "Bahut bade gaddhe mein giroge." You're going to fall into a pretty big hole, which you have dug for yourself. The witness which you feel that I am the witness of everything, which I try to think of myself as the witness, I'm thinking about it. It's something that I'm generating with my mind. It was not there earlier. The moment you leave and you face a traffic jam on the 101, that witness will go away. It's something you're thinking about. The moment you stop thinking that I'm a witness, you don't feel that you're a witness anymore. That is not the real witness. Though I'm not saying that thinking like that is bad. Thinking like that is good. It's a good practice. But that's not the Vedantic witness, the real self. The real self is the self all the time. There is a witness all the time. One more question, then we are done. Yes.
Since we have so many distractions when we are awake through our senses, can we take comfort in the hours that we have where there is only consciousness?
Yes. In fact, we do take comfort. The most comforting thing that we have is deep sleep. The most relaxing thing. Our mind gets tired by thinking about objects, experiencing objects. The mind shuts down. Pure consciousness by itself is not tiring. What gets tired is the mind. So the hours of pure consciousness and deep sleep are most comforting. And those who are great meditators, those who can experience samadhi, it is said that the deepest relaxation is possible in samadhi when they can consciously, deliberately shut the mind down. Yogash chitta vritti nirodha. And they experience the deepest relaxation. In fact, it is said that those who have experienced samadhi, they need not sleep. Their requirement of sleep goes down. So yes, that is deeply relaxing. Last question, one more question.
So, the witness is, consciousness is,
Yes.
I am born, I exist for 70 or 80 years in this form, in this life, and then this body goes and this brain rots, and what continues and what comes back?
Yes. Those questions will be answered. All those things are dealt with. The book looks deceptively slim. It has lots and lots of material. But to put it very briefly, I am not born. The body is born. Even the mind is not born. So according to Vedanta, the subtle body, which includes the mind, it outlasts the body. It was existing before this body came into being. It is there right now functioning through this body. As the body degenerates, gets old and dies, this subtle body will transmigrate to other bodies, to other lives. So the subtle body continues. That's one. But more than that, the subtle body is also continuously changing. But more than that, pure consciousness continues. It was there before the body, before the subtle body too. It is there now, it will be there afterwards. And that's what we are. We are not only not this body, we are not even the subtle body which goes from life to life. We are not even that. This will be clearly shown later on. Very beautiful analysis is there. And what you said, I'll just mention it here. At the end of this text, towards the end of this text, a set of exercises will be given. We shall later on read those and practice those later on. Wonderful techniques, a set of 6 techniques will be given where you can what we are reading now, where you can actually get a feel for that. Those are very beautiful and profound techniques. But don't rush home and start doing them. They will not work until we have understood, firmly got a grasp on what we are going to study now. Once you've got a grasp on that, that understanding will form the basis of those techniques. More of that later in the next class. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. From the infinite has come this manifested world. That is infinite. This is also infinite. Realizing the infinite nature of this manifested world, the infinite alone remains. Om, peace, peace, peace.